The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek as Rosalie Finch ducked through the doorway of Millard's General Store, stooping awkwardly as she always did to avoid hitting her head on the frame. At 6 feet and 1 inch tall, Rosalie towered over every woman in the small Montana Territory town, and most of the men too. It was 1877, and being a woman of such unusual height made her an oddity that most folks couldn't help but comment on. Well, if it ain't the human watchtower. Called Alfred Jenkins from his usual spot by the pot-bellied stove. The collection of old-timers gathered there snickered into their beards, not unkindly but with the casual cruelty of those who didn't understand how their words stung. Rosalie forced a smile, pretending the barb hadn't found its mark as it had hundreds of times before. At 22 years old, she'd had a lifetime of such remarks. She clutched her shopping list tighter, the paper crumpling in her hand as she made her way to the counter, her high-buttoned boots clicking on the wooden floorboards. "Good afternoon, Mr. Millard," she said softly. Her voice was melodic and gentle, always carefully modulated to seem smaller as if to compensate for her height. The shopkeeper nodded politely. "Miss Finch, what can I get for you today?" Rosalie handed over her list, painfully aware of how her arm seemed to stretch endlessly across the counter. She'd been in Copper Creek for only 6 months, having arrived to care for her ailing Aunt Beatrice after the death of Rosalie's parents in a tragic riverboat accident back east. The townsfolk had been cordial but distant, and the constant remarks about her height had worn down what little confidence she'd possessed. "Your aunt doing any better?" Mr. Millard asked as he gathered flour, coffee, and sugar. "A little, thank you." "The doctor says the mountain air is helping her consumption." Mr. Millard nodded sympathetically. "That's good to hear. She's a fine lady, your aunt." Rosalie appreciated his kindness. Unlike many others, Mr. Millard never seemed bothered by her height, treating her with the same respect he showed everyone. "Will that be all, Miss Finch?" he asked, totaling her purchases. "Yes, thank." The store's door swung open with such force that the bell above it nearly tore from its mounting. A hush fell over the room as a tall, broad-shouldered man filled the doorway. His weathered Stetson was pulled low over his eyes, and trail dust covered his denim pants and worn leather vest. Rosalie couldn't help but notice that he stood nearly as tall as she did, perhaps an inch or two taller. "Afternoon, folks," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Owen Hughes," Mr. Millard exclaimed with evident delight. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts so soon." The stranger Owen smiled, revealing straight white teeth beneath his mustache. "Cattle drive finished early. Thought I'd come back and see if my cabin's still standing." Rosalie tried not to stare, but there was something magnetic about the man. Unlike most people who encountered her for the first time, his eyes didn't widen at her height when his gaze fell upon her. Instead, there was something like appreciation in his deep blue eyes, not the usual gawking she was accustomed to. "Well, look at that," Jenkins called from his spot by the stove. "Looks like we finally found someone who can see eye to eye with our local landmark." The other men chuckled, and Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wished the floorboards would open up and swallow her whole. Owen's expression darkened momentarily. He turned toward Jenkins and the old-timers, tipping his hat. "Gentlemen, I'd appreciate it if you'd show the lady proper respect." The laughter died down, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the store. Rosalie felt even more mortified now, being the center of attention. "I should go," she murmured, fumbling with her coin purse to pay Mr. Millard. "Allow me," Owen said, stepping forward and placing coins on the counter. "Consider it an apology for my fellow townsmen's poor manners." "That's not necessary," Rosalie protested weakly. "I insist," Owen replied. His eyes met hers directly, and for once, Rosalie didn't have to look down to meet someone's gaze. It was disorienting but oddly exhilarating. Mr. Millard bagged her purchases, and Rosalie took them with a nod of thanks. She turned to Owen, finding her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Hughes, but I can manage my own affairs." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss Finch, Rosalie Finch, Miss Finch." He tipped his hat to her. "Owen Hughes at your service." Rosalie nodded curtly and headed for the door, painfully aware of every eye in the place following her exit. As she stepped out onto the boardwalk, she heard Owen's voice behind her. "Miss Finch, one moment." She turned, clutching her parcels to her chest like a shield. "I wonder if I might call on you sometime," he asked, his expression earnest. Rosalie stared at him in disbelief. No man had ever shown interest in courting her before. Most seemed intimidated by her height or simply viewed her as an oddity. "Why?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Owen's brow furrowed. "Why not? You seem like a lady worth knowing." Rosalie searched his face for signs of mockery but found none. Still, years of teasing had taught her caution. "I live at the edge of town with my aunt." "The white house with blue shutters," she said finally. "But Mr. Hughes, if this is some kind of joke—" "No joke, Miss Finch." His eyes held her steadily. "I'm not much for jokes, never had the knack for them." Rosalie nodded, still uncertain. "Good day, then." "Good day, Miss Finch." As she walked home, her mind whirled with confusion. No one in Copper Creek had shown her anything but polite distance or outright mockery. Owen Hughes seemed different, but experience had taught her to be wary. Men who showed interest usually did so to win bets or amuse their friends at her expense. When she reached the small white house where she lived with Aunt Beatrice, she found her aunt sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm afternoon. "You're looking better today," Rosalie said, bending to kiss her aunt's pale cheek. "The air was too good to waste indoors," Aunt Beatrice replied with a small smile. Though frail from her illness, Beatrice Finch retained a spark of vitality in her eyes. "What's troubling you, dear?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Rosalie set her packages down and sank into the chair beside her aunt. "Not a ghost, a man." Aunt Beatrice's eyebrows rose. "Do tell." "His name is Owen Hughes. Apparently he's from around here, though I've never seen him before. Rosalie hesitated. "He defended me when Jenkins made one of his comments about my height, and then he asked if he could call on me." "Well," Aunt Beatrice's eyes brightened, "that's wonderful, Rosalie." "Is it?" Rosalie twisted her hands in her lap. "How do I know he's not just making fun of me like everyone else?" Aunt Beatrice reached over and patted Rosalie's hand. "My dear, not everyone is cruel. Some people see beyond the surface to the beautiful person beneath." Rosalie wished she could believe that. Years of taunts and whispers had made her doubt that anyone could look at her and see anything but her unusual height. "Owen Hughes," Aunt Beatrice mused. "I believe I know of him. Samuel Hughes's boy, good family. His father passed some years back and Owen took over their ranch. He's been driving cattle up to Montana for sale, from what I hear. You never mentioned him before. He's not been around much these past few years. Building his business, I expect." Aunt Beatrice's eyes twinkled. "And he's quite handsome, if memory serves." Rosalie felt her cheeks warm. "I hardly noticed." "Of course not," her aunt said with a knowing smile. "Well, if he calls, we shall receive him properly." That evening, as Rosalie prepared supper, her mind kept returning to Owen Hughes and the way he'd looked at her not with mockery or pity, but with genuine interest. It was unsettling, yet she couldn't deny the flutter of hope it stirred within her. 3 days passed with no sign of Owen Hughes, and Rosalie chided herself for even thinking he might have been serious. On the 4th day, she was in the garden behind the house, harvesting vegetables for dinner, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She straightened up, brushing soil from her apron, and walked around to the front of the house. A rider was dismounting from a handsome chestnut horse, Owen Hughes, looking considerably cleaner than when she'd last seen him. He'd traded his trail-worn clothes for a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. His dark hair was neatly combed beneath his Stetson. "Miss Finch," he called, removing his hat as he approached. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Mr. Hughes." Rosalie was suddenly conscious of her dirt-streaked apron and the tendrils of auburn hair that had escaped her practical bun. I wasn't expecting you." "I did say I'd call," he reminded her with a smile. "I had some business to attend to at the ranch first." Rosalie nodded, uncertain what to say next. She was saved by the appearance of Aunt Beatrice at the door. "You must be Owen Hughes," her aunt said warmly. "I'm Beatrice Finch. Do come in for some lemonade. It's far too hot to stand about in the yard." Owen accepted the invitation with grace, tying his horse to the hitching post before following them inside. The house was small but meticulously kept, with simple furnishings that Rosalie had brightened with cushions she'd embroidered herself and wildflowers in mason jars. "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Finch," Owen said as he took a seat at the kitchen table. "Miss Finch," Aunt Beatrice corrected with a smile. "I never married, and thank you, but the credit for its current state belongs to my niece. She has a gift for making any place feel like home." Rosalie busied herself pouring lemonade, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing special." "I disagree," Owen said, accepting the glass she offered. "It takes a special touch to create a true home." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the drink, and Rosalie quickly withdrew her hand, unsettled by the warmth that spread up her arm from that brief contact. "Mr. Hughes runs the Double H Ranch," Aunt Beatrice informed Rosalie. "It's one of the largest spreads in the county." "It's modest compared to some," Owen said, "but it's mine, free and clear, and that's something." "And what brings you to call on us, Mr. Hughes?" Rosalie asked, finally finding her voice. Owen set down his glass. "Well, Miss Finch, I wanted to invite you to the Founders' Day dance this Saturday. The whole town will be there." Rosalie stiffened. The town dance. She'd heard about it but had no intention of attending. The thought of standing awkwardly along the wall while couples whirled around the floor and enduring the inevitable comments about her height held no appeal. "That's very kind, but I don't dance," she said flatly. "Everyone can dance," Owen countered gently. "What my niece means," Aunt Beatrice interjected, "is that she has not had many opportunities to dance, but she is quite graceful despite what she might think." "Aunt Beatrice," Rosalie protested, mortified. Owen's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Then it would be my honor to be your partner, Miss Finch." Rosalie shook her head. "Mr. Hughes, I appreciate the gesture, but I have no desire to be a spectacle for the town's amusement." "Is that what you think I'm offering?" Owen asked, his expression growing serious. "A chance to make you a spectacle, isn't it?" Rosalie challenged. "The tallest woman in town dancing with the man who nearly matches her height. People would talk of nothing else for weeks." Owen leaned forward, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Miss Finch, Rosalie, I'm asking because I would like to spend more time in your company, not to provide gossip for idle tongues." Rosalie wanted to believe him, but years of being the target of jokes had built walls around her heart. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hughes. My answer is no." Owen nodded slowly, accepting her decision without argument. "I understand, but my invitation stands should you change your mind." He rose to his feet. "Thank you for the lemonade, Miss Finch," he said to Aunt Beatrice. "It was delightful." Aunt Beatrice walked him to the door, chatting pleasantly while Rosalie remained at the table, her emotions in turmoil. Part of her wanted to call him back to accept his invitation. But the larger part, the part that had been hurt too many times, kept her silent. After Owen had gone, Aunt Beatrice returned to the kitchen, her expression thoughtful. "He seems a fine man, Rosalie." "Perhaps," Rosalie admitted, "but even if his intentions are honorable, I have no wish to subject myself to the stares and whispers of the entire town." Aunt Beatrice sighed. "My dear, if you hide yourself away because of what others might say, you'll miss all the joy life has to offer." Rosalie had no answer for that. The next day, Rosalie was arranging flowers in the front room when she heard a wagon approaching. She looked out the window to see Mr. Millard's delivery wagon pulling up outside. "I didn't order anything," she murmured, puzzled. She opened the door as the shopkeeper's son, Timothy, jumped down from the wagon with a large parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Delivery for Miss Rosalie Finch," he announced, holding out the package. "There must be some mistake," Rosalie said, not taking it. Timothy shook his head. "No mistake, madam. Mr. Hughes paid for it special, said to make sure it got to you today." Reluctantly, Rosalie accepted the package. It was lighter than its size suggested. "Thank you, Timothy." After the boy had gone, Rosalie took the parcel inside where Aunt Beatrice was watching with undisguised curiosity. "Well, open it," her aunt urged. Rosalie carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a box from Henderson's Mercantile in Cedar Ridge, the larger town 30 miles away. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay the most beautiful dress Rosalie had ever seen. It was a deep emerald green with delicate lace trim, and when she lifted it out, she saw that it was made for someone of her height, no awkward shortness in the skirt or sleeves that she usually had to contend with when buying ready-made clothes. A note was pinned to the collar. "Miss Finch, I hope this isn't too forward, but I thought perhaps you might reconsider the dance if you had something new to wear. The color reminded me of your eyes. Respectfully yours, Owen Hughes P.S. I took the liberty of estimating your measurements. If it doesn't fit, Mrs. Henderson at the Mercantile can alter it." "Oh, Rosalie," Aunt Beatrice breathed. "It's exquisite." Rosalie ran her fingers over the fine fabric, torn between outrage at Owen's presumption and a strange, warm feeling that someone had gone to such trouble for her. "I can't accept this," she said finally. "It's too expensive, and besides, I already told him I wouldn't go to the dance." "At least try it on," Aunt Beatrice suggested. "It would be a shame not to see if it fits." After some persuasion, Rosalie relented. In her bedroom, she slipped out of her plain work dress and into the green gown. It fit as if it had been made for her, accentuating her slender waist and flowing gracefully to the floor. The neckline was modest but flattering, and the three-quarter sleeves showed off her wrists elegantly. When she emerged from her room, Aunt Beatrice clasped her hands in delight. "Oh, my dear, you look absolutely beautiful." Rosalie turned to look at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. For once, she didn't immediately focus on her height. Instead, she saw how the green brought out the color of her eyes and complemented her auburn hair. She saw a young woman who might, perhaps, be considered handsome, if not exactly pretty by conventional standards. "I still can't accept it," she said, though with less conviction than before. "Nonsense," Aunt Beatrice replied firmly. "The man has given you a gift, it would be rude to return it. Besides," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "now you have a lovely dress for the dance." "I didn't say I was going, no," Aunt Beatrice agreed, "but you will." The next day, Rosalie walked into town to post a letter for her aunt. As she passed the saloon, the door swung open and 3 cowboys emerged, laughing raucously. They fell silent when they spotted her, and Rosalie braced herself for the inevitable comments. "Well, if it ain't the town's tallest flower," one of them drawled, his words slightly slurred from drink. "Say, how's the weather up there, Miss Finch?" his companion snickered, and Rosalie quickened her pace, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead. "Don't be like that," the man called after her. "I'm just being friendly. Maybe you'd like to dance with me at the Founders' Day shindig. I could stand on a box." Their laughter followed her down the street, burning her ears and bringing the familiar sting of tears to her eyes. This was why she couldn't go to the dance, no matter how beautiful the dress or how sincere Owen Hughes seemed. She would be nothing but a source of amusement. As she rounded the corner toward the post office, she nearly collided with Owen himself, who was coming out of the sheriff's office. "Miss Finch," he said, tipping his hat. His smile faded as he noticed her expression. "Is something wrong?" "No," Rosalie said quickly, composing her features. "I'm just in a hurry." Owen glanced past her toward the saloon where the cowboys were still loitering, his jaw tightened. "Did those men say something to upset you?" "It doesn't matter," Rosalie said. "I'm used to it." "It does matter," Owen insisted, his voice low and intense. "And you shouldn't have to be used to disrespect." Before Rosalie could stop him, Owen strode past her toward the cowboys. She hurried after him, alarmed. "Mr. Hughes, please, it's not worth." But Owen was already confronting the men, his tall frame tense with anger. "Gentlemen, I believe you owe the lady an apology." The cowboys exchanged glances, their amusement fading as they took in Owen's stern expression and imposing presence. "We were just having some fun," one of them muttered. "At someone else's expense," Owen said coldly. "That's not my idea of fun." The leader of the group, a wiry man with a scraggly beard, stepped forward. "What's it to you, Hughes? She your woman or something?" "She's a lady deserving of respect," Owen replied evenly. "Now apologize or we're going to have a problem." The tension in the air was palpable. Rosalie held her breath, terrified that the situation would escalate into violence. Finally, the wiry cowboy backed down, touching the brim of his hat. "No offense meant, Miss Finch," he said grudgingly. "We was out of line." His companions mumbled similar apologies, then retreated into the saloon, casting dark looks at Owen as they went. Once they were gone, Rosalie turned to Owen, her emotions a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "You shouldn't have done that." "Someone should have done it long before now," Owen replied. He offered his arm. "May I walk with you to wherever you're headed?" After a moment's hesitation, Rosalie placed her hand on his sleeve. "The post office. I'm mailing a letter for my aunt." They walked in silence for a moment before Owen spoke again. "Did you receive my gift?" "Yes," Rosalie said softly. "It's beautiful, Mr. Hughes, but I can't accept something so expensive from a man I barely know." "Call it an investment in the pleasure of your company at the dance," Owen suggested with a smile. Rosalie stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why are you doing this, truly?" Owen's expression grew serious. "Because from the moment I saw you in Millard's store, I knew you were someone special, not because of your height or despite it, just because of who you are." "You don't know who I am," Rosalie pointed out. "I know enough to want to learn more," Owen replied simply. "Will you let me?" Rosalie searched his face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding none. "The dance is tomorrow night," she said finally. "If I were to go, and I'm not saying I will, what time would you call for me?" Owen's smile returned, warming his blue eyes. 7 o'clock. The music starts at 7:30. Rosalie nodded. "I'll consider it. That's all I ask." Owen tipped his hat to her. "Good day, Miss Finch." As she watched him walk away, Rosalie realized her heart was beating faster than usual. She told herself it was merely the aftermath of the confrontation with the cowboys, but a small voice in her mind whispered that it might be something else entirely. That evening, as Rosalie helped her aunt prepare for bed, Beatrice brought up the subject that had been hovering between them all day. "Have you decided about the dance?" she asked as Rosalie brushed out her thinning gray hair. Rosalie sighed. "I don't know, Aunt. Part of me wants to go, but you're afraid," Aunt Beatrice finished for her. "It's understandable, my dear. But consider this. By hiding away, you're letting those who mock you win." "It's not just that," Rosalie admitted. "I'm afraid to trust Owen Hughes. What if this is all some elaborate joke? What if he's only interested in me because I'm a curiosity?" Aunt Beatrice took Rosalie's hand. "Rosalie, in my 63 years, I've learned that fear can rob us of more happiness than any outside force ever could. Sometimes you have to take a risk to find joy." Rosalie squeezed her aunt's frail hand. "When did you get so wise?" "Oh, I've always been wise," Aunt Beatrice replied with a wink. "You're just finally starting to notice." That night, Rosalie lay awake long after her aunt's gentle snores filled the house. She thought about Owen Hughes and his steady blue gaze, about the beautiful green dress hanging in her wardrobe, and about the dance that the entire town would attend. What would it be like, she wondered, to walk into that dance on Owen's arm? To have a partner who didn't have to crane his neck to look up at her. To move across the floor not as an object of ridicule, but as a woman being courted by a handsome man. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. By morning, she had made her decision. Saturday evening arrived with agonizing slowness. Rosalie spent the day helping Aunt Beatrice with household chores, all the while aware of the green dress waiting in her room and the clock ticking toward 7 o'clock. At 5, she finally allowed herself to begin preparations. She washed her hair with special care, using the lavender-scented soap that was normally reserved for special occasions. As it dried, she helped Aunt Beatrice into her best dress. The older woman had insisted on attending the dance as well, though Rosalie worried about the strain on her health. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Aunt Beatrice declared when Rosalie expressed her concerns. "Besides, Doc Evans said fresh air and socializing would do me good." By 6:30, Rosalie was dressed in the emerald gown, her auburn hair arranged in a sophisticated knot at the nape of her neck, with a few curls framing her face. She wore her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she possessed, and had pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. "You look magnificent," Aunt Beatrice said, her eyes shining with pride, "like a queen." Rosalie smoothed the skirt of her dress nervously. "I feel like I'm going to be ill." "Nonsense. Those are just butterflies. I'd be worried if you didn't have them." At precisely 7 o'clock, they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Rosalie's heart leaped into her throat. "He's here," she whispered, suddenly terrified. "Aunt Beatrice, I can't do this." "Yes, you can," her aunt said firmly. "Now take a deep breath and remember, you are Rosalie Finch and you are beautiful." A knock sounded at the door. With trembling hands, Rosalie opened it to find Owen Hughes standing on the porch, looking more handsome than ever in a crisp black suit and string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed and he held his hat in his hands. For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression one of undisguised admiration. "Miss Finch," he said finally, his voice husky, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," Rosalie managed, her own voice barely above a whisper. "The dress fits perfectly." "I can see that," Owen said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But it's the woman wearing it that takes my breath away." Behind her, Aunt Beatrice cleared her throat. "Good evening, Mr. Hughes." Owen seemed to shake himself out of a trance. "Miss Finch," he said, nodding to the older woman. "You're looking well this evening." "Thank you. I understand you're taking us to the dance." "It would be my pleasure," Owen confirmed, offering his arm to Rosalie. "Shall we?" Outside, a smart buggy waited, pulled by the same chestnut horse Rosalie had seen before. Owen helped both women up with gentle courtesy, making sure Aunt Beatrice was comfortably settled with a blanket across her knees despite the warm evening. As they drove toward town, Rosalie's nervousness gradually began to subside, replaced by a cautious excitement. Owen kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling them about his ranch and asking Aunt Beatrice about her health and her life in Copper Creek. "I came here as a young woman," Aunt Beatrice told him. "My husband-to-be had a claim in the hills, but he died of fever before we could marry and I just never left." "I'm sorry for your loss," Owen said sincerely. Aunt Beatrice shrugged. "It was a long time ago. But I've had a good life, even if it wasn't the one I planned. And now I have Rosalie to brighten my days." Rosalie squeezed her aunt's hand, touched by the sentiment. As they approached the town hall where the dance was being held, Rosalie's anxiety returned full force. Lanterns hung from the eaves, casting a warm glow over the couples and families arriving for the celebration. Music drifted from the open doors, along with the sound of laughter and conversation. Owen pulled the buggy to a halt and jumped down to help the ladies descend. As Rosalie placed her hands on his shoulders and he lifted her down, their faces came close together for a moment. Rosalie caught the scent of soap and something uniquely Owen, a clean, outdoor smell that made her think of pine trees and open skies. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Rosalie took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." With Aunt Beatrice on one arm and Rosalie on the other, Owen escorted them into the hall. As they entered, Rosalie was acutely aware of the conversations that paused and the heads that turned in their direction. She held her chin high, determined not to show how much the scrutiny affected her. The hall had been transformed for the occasion with bunting and flowers. A small group of musicians played on a raised platform at one end, while refreshment tables lined the other. The center of the floor was already filled with dancing couples. Owen led them to a row of chairs along the wall, where several older ladies were seated, watching the proceedings. "Miss Finch," he said to Aunt Beatrice, "may I introduce you to Mrs. Peterson? She makes the best apple pie in the county and would be happy to keep you company while I steal your niece for a dance." Aunt Beatrice smiled at the plump, cheerful-looking woman. "I'd be delighted." Once Aunt Beatrice was settled, Owen turned to Rosalie and extended his hand. "Miss Finch, may I have this dance?" Rosalie hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. She could see people watching them, some with open curiosity, others whispering behind their hands. "Everyone is looking at us," she murmured. "Let them look," Owen replied. "They're only admiring the most beautiful woman in the room." Before she could protest further, Owen led her onto the dance floor. The musicians were playing a waltz, and as Owen placed one hand at her waist and took her other hand in his, Rosalie was struck by how natural it felt to be partnered with someone of nearly her own height. "I should warn you," she said nervously. "I haven't danced in years." "Just follow my lead," Owen said with a reassuring smile. "It's like riding a horse your body remembers even if your mind doesn't." And then they were moving, gliding across the floor in perfect synchronization. Owen was an excellent dancer, guiding her with subtle pressure and making even her occasional misstep seem graceful. After a few moments, Rosalie forgot about the watching eyes and lost herself in the music and the feeling of being in Owen's arms. "See," he said, "you dance beautifully." Rosalie smiled, feeling a rare sense of joy bubble up within her. "It helps to have the right partner." "Indeed it does," Owen agreed, his eyes warm as they gazed down at her, not from a great distance, as most men had to, but from just a few inches above her own eye level. As the waltz ended and another began, they continued to dance. Rosalie was vaguely aware that they were the center of attention, but for once, she didn't mind. Let them look, she thought. Let them see that Rosalie Finch could be graceful and desirable despite or perhaps because of her height. After several dances, Owen suggested they take a break for refreshments. As they made their way to the punch bowl, Rosalie noticed with surprise that several people nodded to her in a friendly manner. Mrs. Peterson was deep in conversation with Aunt Beatrice, both of them laughing like old friends. "Your aunt seems to be enjoying herself," Owen observed as he handed Rosalie a cup of punch. "Yes," Rosalie agreed. "I haven't seen her this animated in months." They found a quiet corner where they could observe the dancing while they refreshed themselves. Rosalie was about to remark on the decorations when she noticed Alfred Jenkins and his cronies approaching. Her muscles tensed automatically. "Evening, Hughes," Jenkins said, nodding to Owen before turning his attention to Rosalie. "Miss Finch, I must say, you cut quite a figure on the dance floor." Rosalie waited for the barb that usually followed such openings, but instead Jenkins continued. "Makes a man regret his advancing years, seeing how well you young folks can still twirl around." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," she said cautiously. The old man cleared his throat awkwardly. "And I suppose I owe you an apology for some of my previous remarks. A man my age should know better than to tease a lady." Stunned, Rosalie could only nod in acknowledgement. After Jenkins and his friends moved on, Rosalie turned to Owen. "Did you have something to do with that?" Owen looked innocent. "I may have had a word with a few people about showing proper respect to all ladies in this town, regardless of their stature, but Jenkins's apology was his own doing." Before Rosalie could respond, the music changed to a lively reel and Owen set down his cup. "Shall we?" For the next hour, they danced every dance, from sedate waltzes to energetic square dances, where Rosalie found herself laughing out loud as they navigated the complex patterns. During a particularly spirited number, Owen swung her around with such enthusiasm that her carefully arranged hair began to come loose, sending auburn curls cascading around her face. "I'm sorry," he said when the dance ended, though his grin suggested he wasn't sorry at all. Rosalie touched her hair self-consciously. "I must look a fright." "You look radiant," Owen corrected her, "like a wildflower in bloom." The sincerity in his voice made Rosalie's heart flutter. No one had ever looked at her the way Owen did, as if she were something precious and wonderful. As the evening progressed, Rosalie was surprised to find herself approached by several townswomen who complimented her dress, and even asked where she had found a gown that fit her so well. The younger Hughes brothers, whom she met briefly, treated her with the same respect they showed everyone else. Even the cowboys from the saloon incident kept their distance, though she caught them watching her and Owen occasionally. When the musicians announced the last dance of the evening, Owen led Rosalie back onto the floor. This time it was a slow waltz, and he held her closer than before, their bodies almost touching as they moved together. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said softly. "I've been waiting a long time to dance with you." Rosalie looked at him in surprise. "But you only met me a week ago." Owen shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "I first saw you 3 months ago when I came through town briefly. You were hanging laundry in your yard and the sun was catching in your hair. I thought you were the most striking woman I'd ever seen." "Why didn't you introduce yourself then?" Rosalie asked, bewildered. "I had to get to Montana with my cattle," Owen explained, "but I made a point of finding out who you were before I left, and I promised myself I'd call on you when I returned." Rosalie was speechless. The idea that Owen had noticed her months ago and had deliberately sought her out upon his return was almost impossible to believe. "I thought perhaps I'd made too bold an approach," Owen continued when she didn't respond. "Especially when you refused my invitation at first." "I was afraid," Rosalie admitted quietly, "afraid it was a joke or that I'd be ridiculed if I came." Owen's arm tightened around her waist. "I would never let anyone ridicule you, Rosalie, not while I draw breath." The use of her given name sent a thrill through her. "Owen," she said, testing the sound of his name on her lips. "I'm glad I came tonight." "So am I," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her mouth for a brief moment before returning to her eyes. "More than I can say." As the final notes of the waltz faded away, neither of them moved immediately to part. They stood in the center of the floor, gazing at each other as if reluctant to break the spell that had woven itself around them. The sound of applause broke the moment. The town mayor had stepped onto the musicians' platform and was calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude our Founders' Day celebration, I want to thank everyone who helped make this evening a success. And now, as is our tradition, I'll announce the king and queen of the dance." Rosalie had forgotten about this tradition, a playful custom where the couple deemed to have shown the most spirit on the dance floor were crowned with paper crowns and given small prizes. "This year," the mayor continued, "the honor goes to a couple who have truly exemplified the joy of the dance. Mr. Owen Hughes and Miss Rosalie Finch." A cheer went up from the crowd, and Rosalie froze in shock. Owen squeezed her hand reassuringly as they were beckoned forward. "Go on," he whispered. "You deserve this." In a daze, Rosalie allowed herself to be led to the platform, where the mayor placed a glittering paper crown on her head and presented her with a small bouquet of flowers. Owen received a crown of his own and a ribbon for his lapel. "Our queen of the dance," the mayor announced, gesturing to Rosalie with a flourish. Owen took her hand and raised it to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "My queen," he said, loudly enough for those nearby to hear. The crowd applauded again, and Rosalie felt a smile spread across her face, not the tight, self-conscious smile she usually wore in public, but a genuine expression of happiness. As they made their way back to where Aunt Beatrice waited, people called out congratulations and compliments. Rosalie nodded in acknowledgement, still hardly able to believe that she, the woman who had been mocked for her height for as long as she could remember, was now being celebrated by the very same community. "You see," Aunt Beatrice said when they reached her, her eyes bright with emotion. "I told you you were beautiful." "You were right," Rosalie conceded, bending to hug her aunt. "About everything." The gathering began to disperse, with families collecting sleepy children and couples drifting out into the warm summer night. Owen helped Aunt Beatrice to the buggy, then turned to Rosalie. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Rosalie replied without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." The ride home was quiet, with Aunt Beatrice dozing against Rosalie's shoulder, exhausted but content. Owen and Rosalie spoke little, but their silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. When they reached the small white house, Owen helped Aunt Beatrice inside and saw her settled in her bedroom before rejoining Rosalie on the porch. "I should let you get some rest," he said, though he made no move to leave. Rosalie nodded, but she too remained where she was, reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you, Owen, for everything." "I didn't do anything special," he said. "Just saw what was already there, a remarkable woman who deserved to be treated as such." In the silvery moonlight, with her paper crown still on her head and flowers in her hand, Rosalie felt a courage she'd never known before. She stepped closer to Owen. "No one has ever made me feel the way you do," she confessed. "Like my height is an asset rather than a flaw." Owen reached out to touch her cheek gently. "It is an asset. Everything about you is. Your grace, your kindness, your strength, they're all part of who you are. And who you are is someone I've come to care for very deeply, Rosalie Finch." Rosalie's heart thundered in her chest. "Owen." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Rosalie didn't pull away. Instead, she closed the distance between them, meeting his lips with her own in a kiss that was both tender and thrilling. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the night air. "I should go," he murmured, "but I'll be back tomorrow." "I'll be waiting," Rosalie promised. She stood on the porch, watching as Owen drove away, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. For the first time in her life, Rosalie felt not too tall, not too anything, just exactly right. True to his word, Owen returned the next day, and the next, and the day after that. Each visit deepened their connection as they shared stories of their lives and dreams for the future. Rosalie learned that Owen had been running the family ranch since he was 19, after his father died unexpectedly. He had two younger brothers who helped with the operation when they weren't off getting into trouble, as Owen put it with affectionate exasperation. "I'd like you to meet them properly," he told her one afternoon as they walked along the creek that ran behind her aunt's property. "To see the ranch. It's not grand, but it's home." "I'd like that," Rosalie said. She had begun to relax in Owen's company, to believe that his interest in her was genuine and not some elaborate jest. A week after the dance, Owen invited Rosalie and Aunt Beatrice to Sunday dinner at the Double H Ranch. The property was about 5 miles outside of town, a sprawling spread of good grazing land with mountains rising in the distance. The ranch house was a solid 2-story structure built of weathered logs, with a wide porch wrapping around it and smoke curling from the stone chimney. Owen's brothers, Oscar and Oliver, greeted them warmly. At 19 and 21, they were both tall like Owen but lankier, with the same dark hair and blue eyes that seemed to run in the family. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Gonzalez, had prepared a feast, and the dining room rang with laughter and conversation as the meal progressed. Rosalie watched Owen with his brothers, noting the easy affection between them despite their occasional teasing. He was the head of their little family, respected and loved. And the way he looked at her across the table with warmth and something deeper in his eyes made her heart skip. After dinner, while Aunt Beatrice rested in the parlor with Mrs. Gonzalez, Owen took Rosalie on a tour of the ranch. They walked through the barn, where he showed her the horses he was breeding, and out to the corral where several hands were breaking a new Mustang. "It's beautiful here," Rosalie said as they stood on a small rise overlooking the property. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. "It's home," Owen said simply. "My father built most of it with his own hands. I've added to it over the years, that new barn, the irrigation system for the south pasture. Someday I hope to build a bigger house." "The house seems perfect as it is," Rosalie observed. Owen turned to her, his expression serious. "It would be with the right woman to share it with." Rosalie's breath caught. They had known each other for only 2 weeks, yet she felt as if she'd been waiting for Owen Hughes her entire life. "Rosalie," Owen began, taking her hands in his. "I know this may seem sudden, but I've never been a man to hesitate when I know what I want. And what I want is you by my side every day for the rest of our lives." He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Rosalie Finch, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Rosalie's eyes. "Owen, we've only just met." "I know," he acknowledged. "And if you need more time, I'll give it to you. I'll court you properly for as long as you wish. But I already know my heart, Rosalie. I love you. I think I began to love you the moment I saw you that day 3 months ago, and every moment since has only deepened that feeling." Rosalie looked down at their joined hands, her long, slender fingers entwined with his strong, calloused ones. She thought of the way he looked at her, not as an oddity but as a woman to be cherished. She thought of how, in his presence, she felt not too tall but exactly the right height. And she thought of the kiss they had shared on her porch, a kiss that had awakened something in her she hadn't known existed. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Owen Hughes, I will marry you." Joy blazed across Owen's face as he rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms. His kiss was deeper this time, full of promise and passion, and Rosalie responded with a fervor that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Owen pressed his forehead to hers. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory, Rosalie Finch." "And you've made me the happiest woman," she replied. "My tall, handsome cowboy." They returned to the house hand in hand to share their news. Aunt Beatrice wept happy tears and declared she'd known from the start that Owen was the right man for her niece. Oscar and Oliver whooped and clapped their brother on the back, welcoming Rosalie to the family with enthusiastic hugs that would have knocked a smaller woman off her feet. "When shall the wedding be?" Mrs. Gonzalez asked, already planning the feast in her mind. Owen looked to Rosalie. "That's for my bride to decide." "Not too long," Rosalie said, surprising herself with her eagerness. "Perhaps in the autumn when the harvest is in." "October," Owen agreed. "A perfect time for new beginnings." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Copper Creek. To Rosalie's surprise, it was met with genuine good wishes from most of the townspeople. Those who had once mocked her now seemed to see her differently, perhaps because Owen's obvious adoration of her had changed their perspective, or perhaps because Rosalie herself had changed, standing taller and more confident in her own skin. The summer passed in a whirl of happiness. Owen came to dinner at Aunt Beatrice's house several times a week, and Rosalie visited the ranch often, getting to know the routines of the place that would soon be her home. She and Mrs. Gonzalez worked together in the kitchen, with the older woman teaching her the recipes that the Hughes men favored. Oscar and Oliver treated her like a sister from the start, including her in their good-natured banter, and seeking her advice on matters ranging from shirt colors to how to approach the Henderson girls at the next social. Rosalie found herself enjoying their company immensely, never having had siblings of her own. As October approached, wedding preparations intensified. Rosalie ordered fabric for a wedding dress that Mrs. Peterson and several other ladies from town volunteered to help her sew. Owen expanded the master bedroom in the ranch house and added a private sitting room where Rosalie could read and pursue her needlework. Aunt Beatrice's health improved with the excitement, though she still tired easily. She insisted on making Rosalie's wedding veil herself, her fingers working the delicate lace despite their stiffness from arthritis. "It gives me such joy to see you so happy," she told Rosalie one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Your parents would be proud of the woman you've become." Rosalie squeezed her aunt's hand. "I wish they could be here to see it." "They are, in their way," Aunt Beatrice assured her, "and they would approve of Owen. He's a good man with a good heart." "Yes," Rosalie agreed softly. The best of men. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A telegram arrived from the next county, where Owen had gone to purchase breeding stock for the ranch. There had been an accident. A flash flood had swept through a canyon where Owen and several other ranchers had been camped. Owen was alive but injured, with a broken leg and several broken ribs. Rosalie didn't hesitate. Despite Aunt Beatrice's concerns about propriety, she packed a bag and accompanied Oscar and Oliver when they rode out to bring their brother home. They found Owen in the doctor's office in Cedar Ridge, pale but conscious. His face lit up when Rosalie entered the room, though pain creased his features when he tried to sit up straighter. "My love," he said, reaching for her hand, "you shouldn't have come all this way." "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," Rosalie replied, bending to kiss him gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been kicked by a mule," Owen admitted. "But the doc says I'll mend, though I may not be dancing at our wedding." "As long as you're there, that's all that matters to me," Rosalie assured him. The journey back to the Double H was slow and painful for Owen, but Rosalie stayed by his side, helping to make him as comfortable as possible in the wagon they had brought. By the time they reached the ranch, he was feverish and weak from the ordeal. For the next week, Rosalie barely left Owen's bedside, bathing his forehead when the fever raged and helping him take the medication the doctor had provided. Mrs. Gonzalez brought broth and tea, and Oscar and Oliver took turns sitting with their brother so Rosalie could rest, but she refused to return to town. "We're to be married in a week," she told Aunt Beatrice when the older woman visited. "My place is here." Slowly, Owen began to improve. The fever broke and color returned to his face. He complained about being confined to bed, which the doctor assured them was a good sign. "I'm sorry about the wedding," Owen said one evening as Rosalie sat beside his bed working on her embroidery. "We'll have to postpone it until I can stand without help." Rosalie set down her sewing and took his hand. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. What if we didn't postpone?" Owen's eyebrows rose. "You still want to marry me while I'm stuck in this bed?" "I want to marry you no matter what," Rosalie said firmly. "The minister could come here. We could have the ceremony in the parlor with just family and a few close friends, and then, when you're well, we could have a celebration for the whole town." Owen's eyes softened as he gazed at her. "Are you sure, Rosalie? You deserve a proper wedding with all the trimmings." "All I need is you," she replied simply. "Besides, this way I can take care of you properly as your wife." A slow smile spread across Owen's face. "Mrs. Gonzalez would say that's not a proper motivation for marriage." "Mrs. Gonzalez knows very well that's not my only motivation," Rosalie retorted, a blush coloring her cheeks. Owen laughed, then winced as the movement jarred his ribs. "Careful," Rosalie cautioned, adjusting his pillows. "Save your strength for the wedding." And so it was that Rosalie Finch and Owen Hughes were married in the parlor of the Double H Ranch on a crisp October afternoon, with golden light streaming through the windows and the scent of Mrs. Gonzalez's cinnamon cakes in the air. The ceremony was small but perfect. Aunt Beatrice wept happy tears. Oscar served as best man, and Oliver played the violin for Rosalie's entrance. For her wedding, Rosalie wore the green dress that Owen had given her, now embellished with ivory lace at the collar and cuffs, and Aunt Beatrice's delicate veil. Owen, propped up in a special chair that Oscar and the ranch hands had constructed, wore his best suit and a smile that never faltered as Reverend Thomas led them through their vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend said at last. "You may kiss your bride." Owen pulled Rosalie down to him for a kiss that sealed their union, gentle but full of promise. The small gathering applauded, and Mrs. Gonzalez wiped tears from her eyes with her apron. "I love you, Mrs. Hughes," Owen whispered against Rosalie's lips. "And I love you, Mr. Hughes," she replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. Friends and neighbors who had been invited dropped by throughout the afternoon to offer congratulations and share in the wedding feast. Even Alfred Jenkins made an appearance, bringing a hand-carved wooden box as a gift and telling Rosalie she made a mighty fine-looking bride. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, leaving the family alone. Oscar and Oliver helped Owen to the master bedroom, which had been prepared for the newly wedded couple, then tactfully retired to the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, taking Aunt Beatrice to the guest room and Mrs. Gonzalez to her quarters in the process. Alone at last, Rosalie helped Owen change into his nightshirt and settled him comfortably in the bed they would now share. She changed behind a screen into the nightgown that had been part of her trousseau, a confection of white cotton and lace that Aunt Beatrice had helped her make. "Come here, my love," Owen said, holding out his hand to her. Rosalie joined him on the bed, careful not to jostle his injured leg. "Are you comfortable?" "More comfortable than I've been in days," Owen assured her, drawing her close to his uninjured side. "Having you here as my wife. It's more than I dared hope for when I first saw you all those months ago." Rosalie laid her head on his shoulder, breathing in his scent. "And more than I ever dreamed possible, to be loved for who I am, not despite it." "I will always love you for exactly who you are," Owen promised, tilting her chin up to kiss her. "My tall, beautiful, extraordinary wife." Their wedding night was not what either had imagined, constrained as they were by Owen's injuries. But there was tenderness and intimacy nonetheless, a gentle exploration that spoke of the deeper connection they shared and the lifetime of love that stretched before them. As Rosalie drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a woman who ducked through doorways and shrank from attention to one who stood tall and proud, secure in the love of a man who saw her true worth. It seemed like a fairy tale, yet it was her life, a life that had only just begun. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and healing. Rosalie settled into her role as mistress of the Double H with grace, managing the household while Owen recuperated. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, from the pre-dawn breakfasts to the evening rituals of checking the stock and securing the buildings for the night. Aunt Beatrice visited often but maintained her own home in town, saying that newlyweds needed their privacy. But it was clear to everyone that her health was declining, despite the joy she took in Rosalie's happiness. By Christmas, Owen was able to move about with the aid of a cane, though his ribs still pained him when he laughed too hard, which, with Rosalie and his brothers around, was a frequent occurrence. The Hughes household celebrated the holiday with a warmth and merriment that Rosalie had not experienced since her parents' passing. "I have something for you," Owen told her on Christmas morning as they sat before the fire in their private sitting room. He handed her a small box wrapped in red paper. Inside, Rosalie found a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she discovered a miniature portrait of Owen on one side. The other side was empty. "For our first child," Owen explained, a tender smile lighting his face, "whenever he or she arrives." Tears filled Rosalie's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, fastening the locket around her neck. "I have something for you too." She handed him a larger box, which contained a finely crafted leather-bound ledger with his initials embossed on the cover. "For your ranch records," Rosalie said. "I noticed your old one was nearly full." Owen ran his hand over the supple leather. "It's beautiful, Rosalie. Thank you." As spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch in the form of calves and foals, it brought another blessing as well. Rosalie discovered she was expecting their first child. "A baby," Owen breathed when she told him, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Rosalie covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "Beyond words," Owen assured her, gathering her into his arms. "You've given me everything I could ever want, Rosalie. A home filled with love, a partner to share my life, and now a child. I am the most fortunate of men." As Rosalie's pregnancy progressed, the town of Copper Creek embraced the news with genuine warmth. The same women who had once whispered behind their hands now brought gifts for the baby and offered advice on childbirth and infant care. Rosalie accepted their friendship with grace, understanding that people could change just as she had changed herself. In the summer, they hosted the delayed wedding celebration that Rosalie had promised Owen. The entire town turned out for the party held on the grounds of the Double H, with tables groaning under the weight of food, musicians playing for dancing, and children running and playing among the trees. Rosalie, now visibly pregnant, wore a new dress of pale blue that complemented her auburn hair, which she wore loose down her back at Owen's request. As the sun began to set, Owen led her onto the makeshift dance floor for a slow waltz, mindful of her condition. "Happy?" he asked, his hand splayed protectively over the small of her back. "Completely," Rosalie replied, resting her head on his shoulder, "though I miss Aunt Beatrice." Her aunt had passed away peacefully in her sleep just a month before, having lived long enough to know that Rosalie was expecting and to see her truly settled and happy in her marriage. "She's watching over us," Owen said softly, "and she'll watch over our child too." As they moved slowly to the music, Rosalie marveled at how far she had come from the woman who had ducked into Millard's general store a year ago, trying to make herself smaller. Now, she stood tall and proud, secure in Owen's love and in her own worth. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "About how one dance can change a life," Rosalie replied with a smile. "When you called me your queen that night at the Founders' Day dance, it was the first time I ever felt that my height might be something to celebrate rather than hide." Owen's arms tightened around her. "You were a queen that night, and you're my queen every day, tall and magnificent and entirely perfect." In September, Rosalie gave birth to a healthy baby girl whom they named Beatrice Rose Hughes, in honor of the aunt who had been so instrumental in bringing them together. Baby B, as she was quickly nicknamed, had her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair, and, as Owen proudly noted, seemed to be growing like a weed. "She'll be tall like her beautiful mother," he predicted as they stood over her cradle, watching her sleep. "And strong like her father," Rosalie added, leaning into his embrace. As the years passed, the Hughes family grew and prospered. The Double H expanded its operations under Owen's capable management, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Rosalie bore 3 more children, 2 boys and another girl, all of whom inherited the Hughes height and strong constitution. And if the people of Copper Creek sometimes remarked on the family of unusually tall, unusually handsome people at the Double H Ranch, it was always with admiration and respect. For Rosalie Hughes, once mocked for being too tall, had become one of the most beloved and respected women in the community, a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a true queen in the eyes of the tall, handsome cowboy who had danced with her that fateful night and changed her life forever.